whenever I've taught, whether 7th grade or high school, I've carried this poster around with me everywhere. So now its corners are dogged and ripped, and it's been with me wherever I've gone. And the iceberg really reminds me of what hope is all about, because hope is much deeper than a surface level thing. So in life, most of us, we go around and we look at each other based on what we can perceive and what we can see on the surface. But much further beneath are the real motivations that drive us, the real emotions we feel, the fear, the confusion, the uncertainty, the things that we don't speak about normally. And so those are the areas that we need in order to hope, right? If we constantly live based on what we see and what we just take at face value from other people, we never get to a real sense of hope. We get to a market sort of relationship. Like, hey, this is what you can give me, this is what I can give you. It's just a trade. Like, this is this for this, and we'll all be fine. We look at academics as, hey, this is the grade I need, so I will hand you these assignments, and you will give me this grade, and we're all fine. Those things are all surface levels. To me, hope goes much deeper. It's about more meaningful connections. And so here's how I've come to define hope for myself. And I'll unpack this a little bit, and we'll get through some of the stories that'll follow. But I believe that hope is a stance toward life catalyzed by unexpected kindness and timely courage. I think that hope is a stance toward life catalyzed by unexpected kindness and timely courage. And those two things, kindness and courage, I think work hand in hand. So in life, when we have courage to do something we were scared of, to meet someone, to sit with someone who's sitting alone, to introduce ourselves to someone who looks like they might be a little bit adrift, that kind of courage, when it meets with kindness, I think really amazing things happen. And that's what's happened when other people have shown me kindness and they've used courage to do it. It's the only reason I've gotten to be where I am today. So 3 examples I want to talk to you about. The first is Christopher Reeve. This is a guy on the left. He was a huge star in the original Superman films in the 1980s. So when I was growing up, he was my idol, right? So he was the guy I looked at that was like, man, if I could be like this guy, everything would be fine. His biceps were huge. His stature was huge. He was, splayed across every film poster. And I remember going to the movies with my dad and my mom and my brothers, and we saw these Superman films. And this guy was literally the Man of Steel. He had no fear, he had no confusion, no doubt. He just could do anything, right? And so I loved watching him. And so when in real time, in the 90s, when Christopher Reeve was horseback riding and he fell off and literally just destroyed his spine, people like myself who had grown up just idolizing this guy, we were in shock. We thought, this can't happen. He is Superman. The actor himself came to personify the real lived reality of Superman that we all internalize. And so when he was in the hospital, people were wondering, what's going to happen? Is he going to live? Is he going to be okay? Years later, he wrote a book called Still Me. And I read that book, cover to cover. And this is the part of his experience that really translated to me to what hope is all about. Christopher Reeve writes in the book that the moment he got to the hospital and the doctors explained what was wrong with him and what his condition was, he says, the doctors had explained my condition. And now I understood how serious it was, this accident. This was not a C5, C6, which means you're in a wheelchair, but you can use your arms and breathe on your own. C1, C2 is about as bad as it gets. Why not die and save everyone a lot of trouble? Dana came into the room, and this is his wife. Dana came into the room. She stood beside me, and we made eye contact. I mouthed my first lucid words to her. Maybe we should let me go. Dana started crying. She said, I'm only going to say this once. I will support whatever you want to do, because this is your life and your decision. But I want you to know that I'll be with you for the long haul. Then she added the words that saved my life. You're still you, and I love you. And this moment when I read this, I remember reading it as a young man and thinking, this is what life is all about, right? This definition of hope. Here's a guy who thought, I lost everything because I am no longer Superman, right? They said he will never walk, he will never go to the bathroom on his own again. So imagine being personified as this, savior, this superhero, and now being told you will never pee on your own again. Right? This was his new life. And he thinks, as he's in the bed, he thinks, maybe we should let me go. In other words, pull the plug. Life is no longer worth it. I am a shell of the person I once was. And his wife says, you're still you. And that's a powerful act of both courage and kindness to say, you are still the same person you were. The form of your body is drastically different, I'll admit. And his wife, being the one who's probably going to help him do those things, they are going to have a very different life. But she's essentially able to say, you're still exactly the same person. Your heart and your soul are still the same. That's the person I love, and that's the person I married. And so when he writes his book, his testimony to choosing to live, he calls it Still Me. And essentially, Christopher Reeve's journey is a journey from the top of that iceberg to the bottom. To say hope is not about retaining some sense of importance in the world's eyes on the top of that iceberg, but hope is about going deeper and saying, who am I really? What does my identity really come from? Does it come from a compliment, from a film poster, or does it come from a more meaningful place? So that was a powerful idea of hope for me. The second story I want to talk to you about is this guy, Charles Dutton. This is a guy I admire beyond words. He was in one of my favorite, all-time favorite movies called Rudy. That poster is also up in my office if you come hang out with me. And Charles Dutton is this fascinating guy because he grew up and he was a part of a gang. His nickname was Rock, R-O-C. And he says he was called Rock because in the gang they couldn't even afford or find ways to get actual weapons. And so when they met up with others and they would have brawls and fights, Charles Dutton says he would literally bring rocks to these fights. And one day he was having a fight with another gang, and he hit a guy in the head with a rather large rock, and that man ended up dying. So here's Charles Dutton as a very young man. He's now committed homicide. He goes to jail, and he's in jail, and he just resists and rejects everything the guards say. You know, Charles, do this, clean up. No, I mean, just very resistant, just rejects authority, and they put him in solitary confinement quite a bit. But he's going into solitary confinement one day, and this fascinating thing happens. He said he's in his cell. He doesn't know why he does this, but right before he leaves, he just grabs a book off the library cart. He just just unconsciously sort of just grabs it. And he goes into the cell and he says there's enough light in this solitary confinement cell to start reading this book. And the book he happened to grab is a collection of plays by African American authors. And he says as he read this book in solitary confinement, he started to see stories of people who were like him. He started to see stories of people who had made huge mistakes, people who had struggled with poverty and with fear and feeling like there was no outlet. And he said he finally knew he was not alone. And this great quote from him that I love, he says, I found my humanity in that cell, and I was a changed man when I got out. And I love that idea that you could commit a mistake that seems drastic and unalterable, but you could still come back from it. That is similar to Christopher Reeve. Your heart and your soul could still be intact, and you could still do something beautiful. And, you know, I felt like I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Maybe not the same ones that Charles Dutton made, but I felt like, man, I messed up a number of times. And I thought, hope has to be something that you can always come back from any mistake you have made. And when I heard about Charles Dutton's story, it was quite powerful to me to think, there's really nothing you can ever do from which you can't come back and make a difference and do something good. Charles Dutton was released from, actually right before he was released, he came out of his cell and he said to the warden, he said, I want to put on a play. And the warden's like, you're not doing a play. You resist authority, or you're in here, you're locked up. He said, I want to do a play. And he kept pushing until the warden finally let him do a play. And even the guards who witnessed his play said, man, we heard this guy act, and it was like goosebumps. It was amazing. He got out of jail, he was paroled. He went to Yale Repertory Theater, one of the best theater schools in the country. And there he did some incredible things. Everyone who watched him was just mesmerized by the ability to emote, the ability to dig deep and act from a place that very few other people could, right? And part of the reason was his mistake, and the journey he had traveled gave him a depth to be able to speak from that other people hadn't reached. He went from Yale to Broadway. He went from Broadway to Hollywood films and his own sitcom. It was called Rock, but for a very different reason. In it, he was a loving father. He had this incredible career. He's still acting today. But he took incredible courage to not let one mistake define his life. And he could have easily hung his head in shame or anger or vengeance and say, that's it. But instead he chose to use courage to transform his life and still do something good, something powerful. And one that's particularly apt for me. I'm a writer and I love writing. And over the many, many years of constant rejection, I tried to keep hope alive, right? When you think of something you loved when you were a kid. And I remember being a kid, loving writing stories. And I always had this vision that one day I would write a book and my name would be on it. And I wrote many books. When my wife and I lived in England, and with our oldest son, Tyler, who's here, when you were 2 years old, we were in England and I was writing books. I'd put you to bed, buddy, and I'd go into this tiny study and I'd just write for hours. And I wrote novel after novel and book after book. And I sent those books out to publishers and the replies came back, no thank you. Right? I'm like, no thank you, we're not interested. I wrote other books, I have so many novels and books that have never been published in my drawers and on my files. And then I heard the story of J.K. Rowling and I loved it because it was another example of hope, that combination of courage and kindness. So Rowling wrote Harry Potter on a train one day after thinking about his story for years and years and years. She poured her heart out into this book, and publisher after publisher essentially told her, number one, this is not marketable. We can't make money off of this book. Boy wizards aren't a big sale. You know, we don't envision kids loving boy wizards. Superheroes they'll buy. They're not going to read about boy wizards. Number two, this book is incredibly long. It's over 400 pages, Joanne. What were you thinking? Kids cannot read that long. You're not going to get a fifth grader to read a 400-page book. We know different, right? Tyler, Fablehaven, and other books. But they thought, this is not going to happen. This is just too long. So she kept trying. Finally, after 13 rejections, Bloomsbury, one publisher, because the editor's daughter read the book one night, they ended up taking it on. They published it, and we know the rest is history. It went on to do incredible things. What I love is she got the biggest advance ever in the history for a children's book from Arthur A. Levine here in America, Scholastic Book Company. But what I love about her story was she's now richer than the Queen of England, which is crazy. But she is incredibly generous with her time and her money. She has started foundations. She has just done amazing things. She's transformed her courage and not giving up to incredible kindness to make a difference. And then the thought I want to sort of wrap things up a little bit with is this one. Anybody know who this boy is? Look familiar enough? So she's a really cool lady. Her name is Toni Morrison. Anybody have to read Beloved in high school? A few people. It's kind of a tough book to get through. I've read it quite a few times, and I'm still not sure I fully understand it. But Toni Morrison is the author of that novel, as well as many other acclaimed novels. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and she had this beautiful quote. And she's written amazingly complex novels. She worked as an editor for a long time. And she said, when children look at you, they ask one single question. Does your face light up? That's all they want to know when children look at you. And I'll sort of expand her question to say, I think when people look at you, or when we look at other people, we really just carry around that one question. Does your face light up? Right? And when you walk into a room, you see your mom or dad or guardian uncle or aunt or grandpa or grandma, students you teach, people you work with. We all look for that one thing. When you say hello, does someone look at you and they're like, hey? Or do their eyebrows rise, right? Do they look at you like, hey? In other words, I'm glad to see you. My face has lit up because I'm glad that you exist in this planet, in this tiny space where I also exist, and I'm happy about that fact. And she sort of catalyzed to me, what does hope mean? It means that you let your face light up when you meet the world and when you meet other people, right? No matter who they may be, that you allow your face to light up, and that you find yourself in relationships where other people's faces light up as well. So that's the core question I want to leave you with. Is just, does your face light up? And if not, try to find some time to get away from a lot of the things that cause it not to. The stress, the fear, the concern. I've spent a lot of minutes of my life waiting, right? Being stressed, being worried about things that in the end matter not at all, right? The checklist, we think that those things are what life is all about. You come to find out that stuff actually doesn't matter. I've spent a lot of time going through checklists and getting things done and worrying about what I was going to do and what was going on my resume and the grades I was going to get and the job I was going to get and the money I was going to make and the student loans I had to and still have to pay back now. 20 years later, my wife and I still make student loan payments. But the reality is that stuff is very small compared to this big, big question. And in my life, I ask myself at the end of every day when I go to bed, I ask myself this question: does my face light up? Did my face light up today for the person who came to visit me in the office, for my son who wanted to read a book, for my wife when I got home from work? Or did I focus on the checklist? Did I cross off all the items on the checklist, or did I focus on this? And I'll challenge you today that if you go to bed every night and you can answer this question, yes, even if your checklist is left undone, your life will be far more meaningful than the other way around. Thank you very much, and hopefully